No one wants to think about what it would be like to leave the mission field. But sometimes God moves us to different places or completely different paths entirely. This conversation is a challenging one, but one that we must confront, whether we're in the midst of transition or will be in transition one day in the future. Derek and Kristin Dearth were faced with the transition from on-field service to stateside ministry. They help to bring this topic to light and put it into perspective. Kristin, Derek, thank you for taking the time to talk about something that those who are serving on the field for years, possibly even decades, might have to consider at one point or another. They all have to make that transition back from the field to their home country. But we're going to be talking about leaving the field. We're going to talk about the unplanned and the planned versions of those. And we each have our own stories as well in what God has done in our life and our family and ministry when it comes to leaving and exiting the field. But thank you for taking the time to talk through this, because I think it's an important conversation to have. I think it's something that when you get to that point, you don't want to maybe have that conversation with yourself or God or your spouse, your family, but it's something that we do need to prepare for, right? So it's a privilege to be able to sit down with you guys and talk through these things that you have prepared to share. So Derek, why don't you just kick it off and start in what you have for us?
Yeah, I think this is a really challenging topic for a lot of workers, a lot of missionaries, because there's so much that's put into going to the field as far as preparation and support raising and feeling that call of God on your life to uproot, to leave. So many workers have made sacrifices relationally, maybe in their marriage, maybe with their kids, maybe with teammates, that when you get to that point of like, is the Lord leading us back? It's just such a pivotal moment, as pivotal as going to the field was in the beginning. Now you're at that part again. So I just want to undergird this with a few biblical texts as we think about making that transition on or off the field, but especially as we're talking with leaving and going off. So Acts 20:24 says, "But I do not account my life of any value, nor as precious to myself, if only I may finish my course and the ministry that I received from the Lord Jesus, to testify the gospel of the grace of God." So we see here that there is a time when your course is finished, that the ministry that you've been called to is coming to an end. And then we see that more clearly in Ecclesiastes 3:1, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven." And then knowing that God has appointed these seasons and these times in our lives, I think sometimes we get into a mindset of, we have to do this for forever. But this may be a season of our life, and it will be eventually a season because all of our days stop at some point. But there might be a season that God has called us to the field, and that might be shorter or longer than what we originally anticipated. And then knowing the promises of God, where Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." So knowing that even in the leaving, just as God had a plan for you and a future and a hope in going to the field, he also has a plan for you in leaving the field as well. And then a couple more quickly. 1 Corinthians 3:6, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth." So knowing that the season that God has appointed for you, has given you, that is from the Lord. And that might mean that your portion of that season, what you've been called to do, was to plant or to water. And now that season is over, and that's okay. And then finally, we see the pain in the book of Acts where Paul and his companions gather together on the beach. They're all knowing that this is the last time that they'll see Paul again. And there was much weeping, it says in Acts 20:37. On the part of all, they embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful, 38, most of all because of the word he had spoken, that they would not see his face again, and they accompanied him to the ship. So I think sometimes as we read scripture, we can think like, oh, they didn't have these emotions, they didn't have these pains and these struggles. But I love that in Acts 20:36-28 or 38, it's recorded for all time that people were really sad that Paul was leaving and that they weren't going to see him again.
Right.
So we even see in the Bible, there's that same relational pain that we all feel as we transition, as we make that switch.
Yeah. I think biblically, it's good to see, whatever topic we discuss in these podcast episodes, but to see the biblical basis or biblical foundation for these things is really important, because a lot of times we put a lot of weight on ourselves when we make decisions. I mean, in life in general, right? For our family, but we're talking missions, right? So when it comes to mission stuff, it can be difficult because we feel like that. Is it okay to feel that emotion? Like these stalwart, biblical, guys that like Paul, the Apostle Paul, this giant of Scripture that we stand on the shoulders of, in what we do in missions. We need to see that. We need to see that emotion. We see it in Christ, right? We see that he carried those emotions, but to see the relationship that Paul had with his disciples and the people that loved him and that he ministered to. And it's okay for us to feel that. It's okay to have those emotions, to press into that, right? So it's so important to start with the scriptures. So that's really good. Yeah, that's really important. So as we look at the biblical basis now that, these seasons happen, transitions happen, it's okay to press into these emotions. It's okay to face these things. We're not failures, as we leave the field, but there are endings to things. So next we're going to talk about planned endings, which are nicer, not as messy, I think, as unplanned endings. But what do you think about these planned endings? What does that look like? What are some things for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, as a worker or as a missionary, depending on your context and your security level, however you refer to yourself, you need to always be thinking through at some point. I mean, as you go, start planning already. At some point, this will end. And most likely I will be headed back to my home country. That doesn't happen for everyone, depending on if you go there as a single, you marry someone from your host country, maybe you might end up staying there for forever. But for most people, you need to start planning from the beginning. There will be a transition. And, some of those big planned endings are because of kids, because of aging parents, because of health issues, and those types of things. But just the importance of already thinking through and having resources available of how do I handle this planned ending coming up with wisdom and discernment, being prepared for that emotionally, spiritually, and just all the practical logistics that come into moving across the world.
Yeah. And so if I may, kind of press into your story just a little bit. And throughout this episode, we can talk about our stories from time to time, but would you define after 8 years of being in Zambia, serving as a family, would you describe your ending as planned more or less, or was that something that was kind of thought out and prayed over for a considerable amount of time? You were looking at the variables, you were looking at your options and where your family was at. How did that look for you guys?
Yeah, we planned our time to leave. It wasn't so we had some teammates who, from the time they came to Zambia, they said, we're going to be here for 10 years. And they planned out their 10 years and then they left after 10 years. That was very planned out. Yeah. And ours was not like that, but we could sense the Lord bringing us to the end of our time in Zambia. And so when we went back on our home assignment, we met with a counselor to just debrief some of our experiences and our time, and to sense the Lord's leading. We we were just praying through that. And so before our home assignment ended, we knew we were heading back to be done.
Okay.
And to finish our time.
Yeah.
So that we went back for several months, but it was fairly intentional when we went back then to begin our ending process. So it wasn't just getting pulled out because of security issues or an urgent health crisis, but we had 6 months or so to plan how we were wanting to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how was it when so that last home assignment before going back for that several months to kind of close that chapter and finish on the field, would you say that was difficult still in terms of closing that chapter, even though it was a planned ending and it was something that was going to happen, within a few months? Was it still challenging to get to that point? And how did you work through that when you were there for the last few months? Even though it was planned, there was still those emotions. You had counseling and different things on your last home assignment before that few months of ending. But when you were on the field, how did you process through that planned ending? How did you work through that?
Yeah. Again, that's going to be different for different people. And
Sure.
I'll share a little bit about our experience. But I can see for some people, it depends. For each person, it depends on what's the context. Where are you at? How was your experience of being on the field? And under what circumstances, emotionally, spiritually, physically, are you leaving? And that all shapes so much of how you leave and all of that. But we had several sort of difficult. It was kind of a bunch of different situations that were going on that were affecting how we were leaving. And part of it was Zambia was a dark place spiritually, and we were feeling the effects of that. And I mean, we had young kids, and so we were trying to figure out parenting. And as we look back, I don't think we realized it at the time, but I think that there were more spiritual, like oppressive forces that were at work than what we realized, especially on our kids.
Yeah.
And so that was challenging. I think when you're in sort of a dark period, or you're feeling pressures in different ways, you don't think clearly. We really had to. That's part of why we made the decision to leave when we were outside of Zambia. It was easier to do that when we were not under the constant pressures of living there. But it was hard. It was hard to leave.
I think it's really hard to tell people.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, we had met with a counselor, talked with our sending church, talked with family and friends, got a lot of biblical counsel as far as, and just prayer and feeling like, yes, the Lord is leading us to leave. But then when you go back to the field, and especially I was a team leader at the time, there's this weight of now we need to tell people, how is this going to affect all of their lives, and feeling to a certain extent like we're letting people down, in leaving. So that initial phase of telling people, but then when they found out that we were still going to be with action, that we were going to still be serving, but it was going to be in a more leadership admin role from the USA side, that actually helped quite a bit, because people felt like, oh, there's still a connection with you guys going forward. So yeah, it just really, like Kristin said, it really depends on the situation and the context. I think there is a sense too that it's planned. So, there's so many logistics that you have to go through of selling vehicles and homes. I mean, everyone has different items, and I mean, just the amount of stuff that we had to get rid of, which we didn't even feel like we had that much stuff, was a lot.
Yeah.
But then having that quality time with people, both national coworkers that we had that we were really close to, our team that was there, friends. But at the same time, you're not going to be able to do everything perfect, even though it's planned.
Right.
So also we were trying hard to not feel this weight. And we had been in Zambia as singles. We had met there, left for 5 years, gone back, gotten married, had or finished school. So we had already had a leaving Zambia before and coming back for another 5-6 years.
Right.
So that was helpful for us. We're like, we've done this before.
Yeah.
So that made it a little easier.
Nice. What were some of the practical things? Changes depending on people's country, their leadership roles, their ministries. But what were some things that you really wanted to make sure that you ended well, or, finished or accomplished before you came back, for good to the States?
Our ministry was still continuing, and so that was not ending just because it was sort of a
Right.
ministry we joined into when we arrived, and it was going to continue after we left. So we wanted to make sure that that was in a good spot, and that we invested in our national coworkers well, so
Yeah.
that they felt prepared to continue on in the way that they could best be served. So that was one big thing.
Yeah, working with the board as far as like leadership transition, as far as a new director taking over, those types of things. So yeah, both like ministry and then more like the leadership admin side of the field. Those were two big ones, and that's going to look different for every person. And some of those will be sort of messy. I mean, even if you have really strong relationships with teammates, when you announce that like we're leaving, that puts pressure on everybody else, because now they think through like, what are the things that we're going to have to take over and do and change. So we were really blessed that in the planned leaving, there wasn't like relational tensions with teammates or things like that. It seemed like, and that's what we were really trying hard to do. Like, we understand that this is hard for you guys too.
Yeah.
Like we're leaving, so there's more responsibility on you guys to do the things that we were doing on this team and things like that. And just the team is getting a little bit smaller. So yeah, those are just things to think through. I think like, the golden rule, treat others how you would want to be treated. So as you leave the field, if you were in their shoes, how would you want to be treated by them in that situation?
And I think what's really neat to hear for your story is you had that last home assignment, you had made that decision. You're going back just to kind of tie up things and loose ends or whatever, but you asked for counsel, you sought counsel, your church knew, people that supported you knew this was what was going to happen, but allowing people to speak into that, right? I think that's important. So if there are people who are, watching this episode or listening to this episode that are thinking maybe this is something coming on the horizon for them at some point, maybe sooner than they would expect, allow people to speak into that, right?
Yeah.
Get counsel, have your church be involved.
Right. Yeah, and I would say get a diversity of opinions or counsel. And the reason I say that is because for some people, living in a certain context or situation is just unimaginable to them. So we would have different workers, with Action or with different organizations. They would talk with their prayer support team, and they would just share what normal life was like in country X, whatever that is. And everyone's like, you should leave. I mean, I can't imagine being there. But so it's helpful to get like experienced missionary counsel as well. Like, is this normal, or are we really feeling something from the Lord? Is the Lord really directing us and guiding us?
Right.
Yeah, because sometimes you can get folks that are like, or, you talk with close family members that just really want you to come back. They're like, oh yeah, definitely, you should come back. And so, yeah, get that diversity of opinions and counsel is helpful.
Yeah.
I think one thing too to think through is what's keeping me on the field or what's leading me off the field.
Yeah.
What's driving that decision, and is it fear? Is it guilt-based? Is it real life situations that God is, it's very clear, but for a lot of people, it's not clear.
Right.
And it can be kind of a messy situation. And so then that leads to, throughout the whole process, the value of getting counsel from people and even like specific, like from a counselor.
Sure.
Because there's so many emotions, like you said, and a lot of guilt leaving the field.
Yeah.
And you feel like, am I leaving it well? Am I doing everything I could be doing? Like with all the people and the ministries, did I do everything I could?
Right.
Am I a failure for leaving? And there's so many different questions, and it's really room for the enemy to want to get in
Yeah.
and use that huge transition in one's life to bring about, seeds of despair and I don't know, just so many different things that are not helpful for that time and to make it harder for people. So it is helpful to have outside voices speaking in and intentionally asking people to be involved throughout that process.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to discern. Are you running from that place, or is God calling you to move to another place, right? And that's a hard thing to discern. But to allow people, like you said, Derek, with a variety of backgrounds and experiences to speak into that, to press into what is God speaking to you and discerning, is this the enemy? Because the Lord's not going to put those kind of thoughts in your head, right? That you're a failure and, that guilt and shame-based thought life is not from the Lord. So to be able to not listen to that noise, that's something that's really huge you have to do, but it's not easy, right?
Yeah,
that is difficult. But yeah, I think at the end of the day as well, trusting in the sovereignty of God, right? That God is in this, and if you have made that decision through counsel, through much prayer, as a couple, or if you're single, just you and the Lord pressing into that decision, and you've made that decision, trusting that God is sovereign. You might not have ended perfectly well, but God's in control. God is, again, according to that verse, he's the one that is going to do the growth and the increase, right? We've done our part as best as we can. We're still sinful people, but that God is sovereign, right? And that God has ordained that time, and you're moving on, but he's in control and sovereign to take care of what has been left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think not getting hijacked by expectations that maybe you had, where, it's great to read missionary biographies and you kind of get this image of like being on the field means 35 years of hard toil, and then I've accomplished what God has called me to do.
Right.
But when we actually look at the New Testament, I mean, so much of Paul's ministry is actually, for a couple of years here and a couple of years here and moving around. So I think we can kind of get into unhealthy expectations of, and maybe God did call those people to a longer season of ministry. It was supposed to be 30 years in one place with one people. And then the Lord calls other people to a variety of different things for smaller chunks of time. And it doesn't mean that you failed or succeeded in one of those things or the other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So planned and now unplanned. So our story, right, is more of under the unplanned category. Yeah. And I feel like in some ways, the people we've talked to, like yourselves and others that have had to leave and it was planned, they had that planning period. They've said that in some ways it was more difficult than if it was unplanned. For us, COVID hit in 2020 and we just made the decision according to what we thought was best for our family at the time to leave. And we thought it was just going to blow over after a few months, three or 4 months, and we're going to be back. And then it ended up being 5 years straight. And the Lord said, no, that chapter is closed. The decision was made, right? We didn't have to make that decision of not going back to the field. God really just shut that door. It was clear. So in some ways, that pressure was off, but the emotion was like this latent emotion that didn't come at that time of leaving. It came later. And so it's something that was a wave that kind of just all of a sudden hit us. So being unplanned, what do you think? I mean, for us, it was COVID, but what are some things that you would say would contribute to an unplanned ending for missionaries?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the ones that always come up for people are health issues, family issues, whether that's kids going to college, aging parents, unexpected health crises that happen, security or visa, government closures, burnout. Those are some of the main ones that happen for people. And some people are in situations where they always live in that reality. So it's like, I get a visa for 6 months at a time. We don't know. So they're always living under this threat of they're going to go at any moment. And in some ways, then when it happens, they're kind of ready for it. But I think it's very challenging for folks that like ministry is going great.
Right.
They really enjoy being there. It's wonderful. And then all of a sudden they find out something happened with one of their kids that they weren't aware of, and we've got to go back.
Yeah.
Or we got the call that my mom isn't doing well and we need to go back and spend time. Those are the ones that are really challenging. Or for some unknown reason, our visa was not renewed. Everyone else's visas were renewed.
Yep.
But for some reason ours wasn't, and it hit every roadblock, you know? So those are some of the things that I think are just really hard. And again, it's resting in God's goodness and sovereignty in that situation that we don't understand all the reasons why this happened, but this is what happened. And now we need to pivot, and what is God calling us to next? But like you said, there is that grieving and emotional process that happens that will take some time, and you got to give yourself space for that. So getting some sort of debriefing, I think especially outside of your organization, because your organization has different cultures and expectations that you're going to sense in your organization, whatever organization that is. But if you can kind of get outside of that and go through a process with a different kind of counseling service or debriefing retreat kind of place, it is really helpful.
Yeah. 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 I think, when we look at our transition from the field, for the first year, we tried to go back, and it was those roadblocks, right? I said to my wife, I said, okay, once they lift the ban and we can travel, then we'll go. So they said, okay, 3 months, Manila in the Philippines, they said, in 3 months, we'll lift the travel ban. 3 months goes by, not lifted. Okay, another 3 months, it'll be lifted. 6 months goes by, right, in total, from when we came back and to the States, and it still wasn't lifted. So it kept getting pushed. And at some point, you could see clearly that, as much as you might want to go back, it's not happening. And at what point are you trying to push through doors that are closed, that God has said, no, this is a closed door? And it took a year for us to finally release that control over what we expected or wanted to happen. And after that, we could see clearly that God was really calling us to stay here and shift to a different role in the U.S. office with action. So, but it wasn't until we had released that control and said, okay, God, we're going to end that chapter. And it was difficult. But the fruit of that was the ministry continued on, because it's not our ministry. None of what we do is ours. It's the Lord's. The ministry continued on. And our supporting church in the Philippines said, we want to take it on. We want to support this ministry and carry it on financially. So, and with volunteers as well. So, you talked and you mentioned, Derek, in the beginning about, right from the beginning, how are you going to transition out? Because at some point you might have to leave, whether it's planned or unplanned. And for us, we wanted to do that right from the start. We'll start this ministry, but how do we train nationals for ministry, empower national believers to do the work of the ministry? And it was this unplanned exit for us, but the ministry continued on because we had put those things in place. And ultimately, God's in control and He's sovereign. But those things were difficult. We had to release that to the Lord and trust that those roadblocks at some point, those roadblocks aren't, we need to push through, we need to just rest that God has put those in place because He wants to redirect our path. And those are hard things, and again, discernment, right? To know when God puts something because He wants you to trust Him and go forward still, even though it's difficult, and when to discern that, that's not that time. This isn't that time. This is a closed door, and I'm not supposed to push, and I need to rest. What would you say are some practical steps then? Looking at planned versus unplanned, but now no matter what the ending is, what are some practical steps for both of those situations? I mean, you touched on some of it with national, turnover and things like that, but what are some things that in both situations we should be thinking of, or people that are listening and watching this episode should be thinking of?
Yeah, I'll kind of go through some ministry ones, and I'll have Kristin go through some kind of family, personal ones. But yeah, as much as possible, and it's hard and unplanned, but like documenting ministry knowledge for handover. And you'll kind of hear that from workers from time to time where it's like, yeah, I'm the director now of this ministry, or it's kind of my responsibility, but I had no training. I had no documentation. I don't really know what I'm doing. Like, they just left. So as much as possible, try to document that and to give that knowledge, like, and that's a lot of different things like banking information or visa stuff, or if you have contracts with national workers,
Right.
Insurances, like there's so many different things. So as much as possible, having bullet points and like, here's who to call, and try to be, again, the golden rule of like, if the situation was reversed, how would you want to be taking over this ministry for your teammate who's leaving, but you're the one that's leaving instead?
Right.
So think about that. Financial wrap-up considerations. So if you have donors, or it's a business's mission thing, or whatever that is, what are ways that I can support this even after I leave the field? And maybe you're not in a situation health-wise or emotionally
Right.
to do that, but if you are, what are some ways that I can still raise funds for this ministry, help with my knowledge, even from afar? A lot of workers will kind of cut off communication, like when they leave, it's just too painful to communicate. But if you can, like, help out your teammates or whoever is there, your national partners, to continue on and to be in communication with them.
Good.
So, and that kind of goes to, staying connected versus letting go. And I think as much as possible, we would recommend try to stay connected. I think over time, and I think you guys have experienced this as well, it's just naturally going to grow farther apart. We communicate less with folks in Zambia now than what we used to when we first came back. But especially when you first go back, keeping those connections, helping people out, saying, I'm praying for you, I think is really helpful. But yeah, you might be in a situation where something really traumatic happened, where it's like, I can't have connection right now with the field, and that's okay too. And I think that depending on the situation, folks there will understand that. But
our worker in the Philippines, she said, I feel like you left me, you abandoned me. That was her initial thought. But then Alay kept ministering to her and mentoring her, and whatever questions she had, we were always on it. And for the first year straight, we were just really constant communication. Then we kind of weaned it off. And now just every once in a while, she'll send something or ask a question. But I think it was very important for that period of time. And it can be a month, it could be a year, it could be 5 years, and everything's so relative to what people are experiencing. But for us, it was about a year, and our worker out there did not feel like she was abandoned after that year. She felt like, okay, you're still there. You're just a text message away for any counsel or help or question. But ultimately, we did want her to feel like she can go to our church there and her partners there for those answers and questions and things like that, which was really good. And I think it was healthy for us because it was hard, right? It's hard because you still feel connected. And so we kind of wanted to break away because it was so emotional. So I think it was good for both of us to eventually wean off that constant communication and to have her be strengthened and know that, she can do this. God is giving her the ability to do this ministry apart from us. So that was important. What other things would you say? I guess family wise, that's a different animal as well.
Yeah, it is. And so much of it is all the practical things of, are your kids at school age, and how are you doing school? Do you need to find a school? Are they how are they adjusting to the change? And I think that we can sometimes think, well, we were the ones doing the ministry. We were doing all these things. The transition is hardest on us, and the kids, they just rebound, they're resilient, and they are, but they need help walking through that process just as much as we do.
Yeah.
And so thinking through different resources that you can get for these little or big TCKs. And, but just depending on in housing, where are you going to live and what does that look like? Some of those things too decisions are hard, because even though for us it was a sort of planned coming back, we felt very comfortable living in a rental situation.
Yeah.
We felt very comfortable living in a situation where we were minorities in our community. And our kids did not feel that way.
Yeah.
They really wanted stability and they wanted to feel normal.
Yeah.
And so the things that made us feel normal and made us feel good,
Yeah.
it wasn't the same for our kids.
Sure.
And so it's just working through those things and being sensitive to each other, giving grace to each other. And I think when God made it available for us to purchase our own home, that was like, is that okay? You know, we'd always been renting. We'd always been in we don't have a 5-year plan. We don't have a 10-year plan.
Right.
We're just going to go take the next step in front of us.
Yeah.
So it really felt the stabilization of buying a home was destabilizing because it's like, that's not who we are. We're not
Right.
homeowners.
Right.
We're not into
we don't put down roots.
yeah.
Like that,
And so
yeah.
that was a hard thing for us. It brought up a lot of questions, even though that was years down the road.
Sure.
And we weren't really planning to have those emotions. We didn't think about that. We thought we were kind of beyond that. But that's some of as you're making those adjustments to just practical life and how do you make money? Are you going to cut off your support? Or are you still going to be support-based doing ministry from your new location? All of those things are questions you kind of have to answer and walk through those things as they come up. So for some people, it's really helpful to be able to know what situation are you walking into.
Sure.
That helps some of the logistical plans when you're coming back. But like for you guys, you don't know what you're doing.
That's right.
And so again, as the Lord, for each person's situation, I think realizing that those are all normal feelings. Those are all normal expectations and like that you've been living in a certain way in a certain part of the world. And God has fundamentally changed you during that time. And so in some ways, when you're coming back, it's like you don't have a home anymore.
Right.
The place that you feel the most comfortable is maybe not, you felt comfortable in the role that you were in your host country. And now that you're coming back to your home country, it doesn't feel like home. And people don't understand those kinds of challenges that you've had to walk through. And so you feel a little bit homeless.
Yeah.
And you have kind of feelings and people might try to understand, but they can only understand to a certain point. And I think that's why that debriefing is so helpful to be able to get those words to articulate, this is how I really feel. And have a community, especially it might be your mission community still, that other people that have walked that path.
That's right.
That really can help you make some of those decisions and help you to know how to articulate what you are feeling as you go through it.
Yeah. So I just want to back up. You mentioned TCKs. Some people that are watching or listening might not know that term.
Okay.
So just briefly explain TCK and maybe how that transition from the field to their home country might be difficult for a TCK.
Yeah. So TCK, third culture kid, similar to missionary kid, but it's a little bit broader because it includes kids who maybe their parents weren't, missionaries, so to speak, or field workers, but they have been influenced by living in another culture outside of their home culture. And for some of them, like Derek and me, we really felt like at Christmas time, we wanted snow. We were from the Midwest. We had 4 seasons. We liked snow. That was a huge part of what Christmas was for us. Our kids, we thought that surely they did too, but they never knew what snow was at Christmas. That wasn't a big deal for them. So we realized, they even have a different experience than we do. And that's like, we can't share in that together with our kids as a family. So they're shaped by all of those experiences of living in a different culture and having a home culture and not really feeling at home in either one. And so there's some sort of nebulous third place out there that is for them. And when we came back, Yeah, I just read a bunch of different resources. I tried to get as much as I could to help my kids at their age, where they were in their age process and developmentally to know how to help them assimilate into this new place and get words to understand what they were feeling. And so one day we sat down, I mean, they were 5 and 3, and we sat down with blue and yellow Play-Doh and just let them play together and talk about, this is one culture, blue is Zambia and yellow is America. And then you start mixing it together, and what happens? Well, it turns green. But there's like little strands of yellow in there and little strands in all different shades, and it's all mixed together. It's not some neat, mass of color, like a nice clean color. Right. It's like all mixed up in there. And it's like, that's your life. That's how, that's what your life looks like. So if you feel like you don't fit in, it's because you don't really.
Yeah.
But look at how beautiful that is.
Right.
There's a special place that God has for you and your experiences and your kind of bluish, greenish, yellowish mass to be able to, minister to other people and walk alongside other people in ways that other people can't.
Yeah.
And so, helping kids, but getting resources either through counseling, debriefing, other, there are just so many other like in-person resources, but then there's also like lots of books that can help walk through with your kids, how they're feeling. Some mission organizations really offer a lot. And, so just I think you got to be sensitive to where your kids are at.
Yeah.
And being able to walk through with them, their experiences, which is hard because if you're feeling depleted already. But that's why it's great to have as many, just welcome all the help you can get from other people. Yeah,
and I think to make sure that you have those help resources available, it's so important to continue to cultivate those relationships when you're on the field. So over the years, you will find workers that are like, we've really lost touch with our supporting churches. We've really lost touch with our family in a lot of ways because we've just invested here, which is great and commendable in a lot of ways to invest in the place that you're serving. But then when something happens and you have to transition back, you don't have that community and that support. So it's really important to continue to cultivate those relationships so that those people are there for you.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I would say is, but also realize that those people have not gone through what you're going through.
Yeah.
And so when you're on the field, you can kind of have this status of, wow, they're this missionary, and you come back and people give you a car to drive, and there's like this great cabin they allowed us to stay in for free for 6 months when we're on home assignment. But then all of a sudden when you come back, that wears off pretty quickly, and now you're just one of everybody else going through the same struggles and the same things. So that's hard for a lot of people as well, where you kind of lose that missionary status of support, and kind of, you're this, exotic kind of thing that that they're not doing. So they're like, wow, that's amazing that you guys do that. But when you come back, you're just one of everyone else. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, that when you do come back, that kind of shine wears off pretty quickly in a lot of ways. And that can be a little disorienting for everyone.
Yeah, it's hard to process that. So life after the field, right? You've come back. You have here, Derek, who am I if I'm not a missionary? Your identity for so many years has been in that place, which I think contributes to it being difficult coming back and making that decision to come back, because you feel like, no, God's called me to be a missionary. He's called me to be in this place. And you kind of like just, plant your flag down and you don't ever pick that flag back up. It's planted, right? And for us, we were holding with tight, white-knuckled fists, this calling. No, we're called to a specific place, this time. We have to stay there forever. I need to die there on the field. You talked about these biographies. You read these biographies of these missionaries that just, left everything on the field by dying on the field, literally bringing everything that they had in coffins, right, in caskets, because they're like, no, we're going to be there for life.
Right.
So in terms of that identity struggle and the reentry challenges, you did talk about that just now a little bit, being disoriented a little bit in that transition coming back. You're just kind of the same as everyone else now, but integrating back into a new culture because you've been so used to another culture. What are some ways to kind of work through that and process that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the Sunday school answer, but you really need to make sure that your identity is in Christ, and that's who you are, and that, it's not being a missionary or a pastor or, whatever that is that you were doing out on the field, but like that really is my identity. And that ministry that I was involved in for a period of time was a stewardship.
Yep.
It's something that wasn't mine. It was the Lord's, as you mentioned, but that means that I might not do that for the rest of my life. And it is a stewardship, and it is a privilege to be a part of. And I think that a lot of us who are in ministry for a long time, it's so scary to think about, but what if I don't do this someday? But realizing that, again, just as the Lord called you into that season of ministry for a time, He'll call you to something new, and that might not be in ministry anymore to the same extent as far as full-time ministry. That might mean having to get a normal job, or your spouse having to get a normal job, and it might look a little bit different than what it looked like before, but that's okay. And I think that that's really the part that's hard for a lot of people is just the financial piece, because if you're a faith-supported worker on the field 100%, if we transition off and we're no longer part of our organization, or if we're based in the States, are people going to still support us to the same level that they used to? And they may not, and it may look different going forward, but knowing that the Lord is faithful and that He'll provide what you need. But yeah, it might mean having to get a normal job for a while, or waiting for a season. But, time does heal a lot of wounds and a lot of just emotions and struggles that we all deal with. And it is just a process of going through the weeks and days and months, faithfully trusting the Lord, keeping up with your daily disciplines of prayer and the Word, and being involved in a local fellowship, and loving your family. And the Lord works through just time. And over time, it's like, boy, 6 months ago, I was really raw coming off the field, but I feel more normal. The kids feel more normal. We're getting into a new routine. I do see life after the field.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I remember when we were in Zambia, I just thought, this feels too significant to just close that chapter and be done. Like it has to have some bearing and effect on what's next. And I really wanted the Lord to use our experiences in Zambia in the future. And so I think that's really appropriate. That's a huge thing for everyone. You've given up a lot. You have had significant experiences, and God has really changed each of us. And so asking the Lord, please use this time, use whatever you taught me. And it takes a lot of humility, I think, and willingness to let the Lord bring up all of that stuff. You have to be willing to work through all of that. And I've seen God do it. And so, just to recognize and look through the past experiences and how does that affect what's coming, what's next. So there is, instead of an always looking back, there's kind of a taking what was behind and pivoting and looking toward the future with how can I serve the people better? There's a lot of things that missionaries have learned about loss and about giving things up and about change and service in hard places. And people here are experiencing all of those things, or other people that are heading to the field are experiencing those things. And those can all be used to help disciple and mentor other people who are still going through those here. And so, or on the field too. But I think there's a unique way that God can use people who are coming off the field to still use those experiences and let them be let that effect carry on into the present and future.
Yeah. I think there's so much here for people to meditate on, to think on. But yeah, very encouraging to hear the biblical basis for this, ending well. There are seasons of time. It's okay to press into the mess, right? Because it's messy. But I think if people are listening and watching this podcast episode and are thinking of making a transition, or that God might be, having that come down the pike on the horizon for them, I think that you've laid out a lot of really significant things to think about, to pray about, and that this is a normal thing, right? This is something that happens. It's normal. Transitions happen. And my big takeaway is we're not a failure. And God is sovereign. He's in control. And to press into that, to know him more, to know him better, trust him in it, and also trust the people that God has put in your life, at your church, your friends and your family, people that can come around you and support you in this. So I really appreciate taking the time to talk through these things. We both, again, have our planned and unplanned, transitions out of the field and ministry and missions full time, but God is in control. He's sovereign, and he has taken us through it, right? And he is good. He is always good. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and what God has done in your life. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.